Well, here's the site for our new storage shed with attached trash facility. If you'd like to build this structure, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, the first thing I did to prepare the site was call in our landscaper, Roger Cook, and he took his bobcat and scraped away the topsoil so that I'm down to the subsoil. Then he brought in a load of what we call 3/4-inch crushed stone and just roughly spread it out in the area that I'm going to build over. The next thing was to get the lumberyard to drop off a load of material. Pressure treated for the floor frame, plywood, dimensional stock for the walls and roof, and even the roof shingles. Now, they also brought along some 6x6s, pressure treated so that they can be in contact with the ground, and these will become the foundation for the shed. I've used this method of supporting decks many times in the past, and it works pretty well as long as you set it on the crushed stone. Now, the other thing is to make sure water doesn't gather. But because we're on a natural slope here, the water will just run through the stone and away, so the building won't be affected by frost. But one of the things I want to do is keep this structure low. So I'm going to use this 10-foot 6x6, which supports the back of the trash facility, as the gauge. I'm going to set it as close to grade as possible. Now, to loosen up this soil, I think the best tool will be my rototiller. But before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now, with all the loose subsoil removed, I want to check the grade. The trash doors are going to open out. I don't want them to hit the existing grade, so I want to check the depth of the trench. And I've got about 12 inches now, so I want to add about 6.5 inches of this crushed stone before I set the timber. Now I just grade the stone with my iron rake, and we'll compact it with a tamp. All right, with the beam cut to length, I can now set it in the trench and check it for level. Now, I may have to play with this for a while, but getting it perfectly level now will pay off in the end. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, to anchor the sill, I'm going to use a piece of what's known as number 4 reinforcing bar that I picked up at our local masonry store. All right. Well, that took about 3 hours to get all these sills perfectly level and anchored, but that's going to make everything go a lot easier.
He's ready to operate, but he's no ordinary doctor. He's HGTV's Ron Hazelton, the house doctor.
I'm ready to start the surgery, sir.
This doctor makes house calls with a style all his own. Ron Hazelton, the house doctor. Tonight at 6 on HGTV.
Security in an insecure world. Chevy Blazer, like a rock.
Food Network, something different, something fresh, and a place to share it. People everywhere are connecting with Food Network to satisfy their curiosity, share real stories, and experience the unexpected. Food Network showcases the heartful, the artful, and the eclectic, with programs and personalities that inspire and inform. Food Network, television that's full of flavor. If you don't get Food Network, call your local cable operator or satellite provider for details.
For the last few minutes, I've been taking some 2x6s that are pressure-treated lumber and cutting them for the joist. I also took a 12-foot piece, which is the ribbon joist, and laid it out at 16 inches on center. Now, when I'm building a deck like this, I take a look at each joist and check it for a bow or a crown. I want any crown to face up. That way, when there's a load on the floor, it'll push it flat rather than sagging. Well, I've just snapped a chalk line a ½ inch in from the edge of my sill. Now I'm going to pull the floor to it and tack it in place. That'll leave me a ledge to catch the trash bin floor. Right, 173 1/8. I've checked my diagonals, so I know the floor frame is square. Now I can tack it to the sill on this side. Now these blocks that are right at the center of the floor do two things. They stiffen the floor and they add support for the plywood joint. Well, now it's just a matter of nailing down some 3/4 inch plywood with 8B ring shank nails. Now this assembly will be the trash bin floor. I'm using 2x4s because the loads will not be as great, but the techniques for assembling it are the same. With this as our platform, we can now begin to lay out the walls. Now, using the deck as a large sketch pad, I've laid out the gable ends. They will be on the short ends of the floor plane. I've laid it out full scale, and all the way down here at the bottom, I've set up a couple 2x4s, one for each gable end. That will be the sill plate. And I've laid out 2x4s, 16 inches on center for the studs. Now here in the deck, I have some of the studs just loosely laid in place for the gable wall, and I've cut a pair of test rafters. They seem to fit pretty well. I want to show you how you calculate a rafter. You have to know a couple things. First, this angle, or the pitch of the roof. It's 45 degrees for this roof, and the pitch is a 12/12, which is 12 inches of run for every 12 inches of rise. The other thing I have to know is what the actual run is, and that's half the width of this building. It's 8 feet wide, so the run is 4 feet. Then, using a construction calculator, I can figure it out. First, I enter a decimal function and the angle, which is 45 degrees. I press tangent, and that comes out to be 1. I enter it into the calculator, go back to feet, inches, and 16ths, press 400, which is the run, enter that as the run, press the slope button, and there's the length of the rafter, 5 foot, 7 7/8. Now the other way to figure it is to use a framing square, or to simply take it off the plan. Now we'll just nail it together. Now this is just a temporary block that represents the ridge pole. We'll pull it out just before we start to frame the roof. Now you can see why I notched only 1.5 inches out of the studs. It lets the studs stay flush with the rafter, and it gives me a place for nailing. Well, I got started this morning by building a header out of 2x6s and installing it in the gable, and that will help carry some of the roof load. Then I install these side pieces to frame in a small window opening, and below those pieces will be another 2x4, which is the sill for the window. All right, now we're ready to sheathe it with some 1/2 inch plywood. Now perhaps you noticed that I've let the plywood hang below the sill plate by about 6 inches, and that's so I can attach it to the floor frame later. Now to trim out the excess plywood at the window openings and even along the top edge of the roof, rather than use a circular saw, I find it easier to use a router with a 1/2 inch trimming bit. The ball bearing just rides up against the frame. Now I finished making the second gable, which was identical to the first, And here I've assembled the back wall, the simplest of all, just studs 16 inches on center, no windows. And the last thing to do is to double up the top plate. Well, now I'm ready to erect the back wall. And this is the time that if you happen to have a neighbor or a friend who can give you a hand, you can use it. All right, Hugh, what do you think? You ready? All right. Nice and easy. Okay, now you'll also notice that I've let the plywood overlap on this back wall for some nailing. Okay, right there. You just steady it. I'm going to go on the outside. Okay, that looks good. Now this framing is for one of the window units. Now, of course, to make the thickness of the header match the width of my studs, I have to use a 1/2-inch plywood filler. And this is the header assembly for our double door. All right, Hugh, I can take it from here. Thanks for your help. Now with this 2x4 as a brace to hold the front wall plumb and square, I'm ready to sheathe it.
Here we are.
Let me know you'll be there forever. Girl, somehow we can hold on tight. Show the world we can stay together. Tell me, girl, I know what you're thinking.
Introducing Laura Ashley Paint. A colorful collection of soft tones and rich hues. Colors from your fabrics. Colors from a favorite pattern. Colors to make every room beautiful. Laura Ashley Paint. Colors you love. In 100% acrylic quality you can trust. Now available at most Lowe's home improvement warehouses.
Remember the time we almost screened in the porch?
With ScreenTight's porch screening system, you can install, repair, or replace your screen in 3 easy steps. Attach the base strip to your wood framing. Roll the spline into the groove to secure the screen, then simply snap on the cap.
Do you remember the time we almost...
ScreenTight porch screening system. There's no better way to screen or rescreen your porch.
With 1010 ATT00, you get a whole new level of directory assistance. For example, say you need a forklift. Specially trained, smart people can help you find any number in America.
Local?
And long distance.
What if I can't remember a name?
You don't need the exact name, you don't need the area code. Just dial 1010 ATT00.
What if I can't remember my name?
Then your new name will be Steve.
1010 ATT00. For directory assistance, it's the only number you need to know.
Steve was good.
The world's first active head restraint, designed to reduce whiplash. From Saab.
Well, good morning. We had a little bit of rain last night, but it's a beautiful day today. The first thing I did this morning was to set this brace to hold the front wall straight while I framed the roof. I also took some time to set up a proper scaffolding that goes all the way around the building. I'm going to need it to set the rafters, plywood the roof, and install the trim. Now, I could do it from ladders, but it would take me twice as long. Now, I've also laid out the ridge, and that's the next piece to set. Now, the ridge pole is a piece of 2 by 10, and I've laid out the location of the rafters on the ridge pole and the corresponding location on the top of the wall plate. Now, it's just a matter of setting the ridge in between the rafters we already set on the gables. Now, here are all the 2 by 6 rafters to frame the roof, and they're cut to match the ones on the gable end. Now, it wouldn't do to set all the rafters on one side because it might push the ridge over. So I'll set every other one, just toenailing them into the plate. Now, the idea at the ridge is to have the tip of the rafter come even with the top corner. This one's a little low, so we'll just pull it till it's even and nail it. And continue the same way down the rest of the ridge. Now I'll just finish nailing them off up top. Now to sheathe this roof, I'm using 5/8" CDX plywood, which is plenty strong for this roof. Now take note that I've allowed the plywood sheathing of the roof to overhang the gable end by 3 inches. That's to account for a trim detail. Now this scrap piece of 2 by 6 that I've just ripped is for a block to make a return on the gable end. And notice that I've ripped it at quite a sharp angle, 45 degrees set on my circular saw. Now there's the block cut to length. And now I'll just clip off the corners. Now here's a piece of 2 by 8 that's been ripped at a 45-degree angle. I set the piece of 2 by 6 that I just made on top of it so the angles are flush, mark the corners, and clip those. And here's where they go, right on the corners of the gable end, set flush with the rafter tails. Now that's the second piece that I cut. Here's the first piece that I cut. Now this piece of 1 by 4 pine, which I like to buy pre-primed, will become the soffit. And it just gets nailed onto the bottom of the rafter tails. Next, I wrap a piece of pine underneath the blocks. Now this piece of 1 by pine is known as the fascia board, and it's mitered on each end at a 45-degree angle. Now the piece of fascia that wraps the return is mitered on each end, and the top edge is beveled to match the bevel of the blocks. And there's a little block that goes right on the end to complete the fascia detail.
Order a home video of the project you've just seen Norm build, complete with a measured drawing and materials list. Call toll-free 1-800-892-0110. The price is $24.95 plus shipping and handling. Get the measured drawing alone for only $10. The number again is 1-800-892-0110.
With over 800 tax law changes, doing your own taxes can be a nightmare.
Hey.
Hi, Bill from H&R Block.
What are you doing in my dream?
Well, it's tax time. Trying to save you some anxiety.
Thanks.
H&R Block. We know. Do you?
Forecast mostly sunny skies. Every day, more people are choosing Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse. And here's why.
No one else sells more lawn and garden supplies.
Virtually any type plant you need, Lowe's has it.
A jungle's worth of trees and shrubs.
All back for a full year. Plus everyday low prices guaranteed.
Business is really blooming around here.
After all, you can't spell flowers without Lowe's. When it comes to home improvement,
Lowe's knows.
Lowe's, proud sponsor of 1999 Special Olympics World Games.
I
I know what you're thinking. 10-10 this and 10-10 that. You got tens and tens coming out of your ears. You're confused.
I understand that. I'm confused.
Well, here's a number that can actually clear things up. 1010 ATT00. It's for directory assistance. They can help you find any number in America, even if you're a little confused.
1010 ATT00. For directory assistance, it's the only number you need to know.
Now I'm confused again. Why?
There's a place in your mind you still go, isn't there? The little beach town where melon and sea foam colored memories remain as vivid as the day they were painted. The best of life, sparkling like colored reflections in the water. Then suddenly, years gone. There's a way back. Enter HGTV's Dream Home Giveaway and win our fully furnished custom home at Rosemary Beach, Florida's most majestic planned community. This is the way coastal living used to be. Simple, wonderful. To make things even better, there's a $19.99 Cadillac Escalade to go with your new home and your new hometown. It's all brought to you by Sears and Cadillac, along with these national sponsors. To enter, visit any Sears store or send a handwritten postcard with your name, address, and phone number to the address shown. Entrants automatically become eligible to win one of 5 Sears shopping sprees. HGTV's Dream Home at Rosemary Beach. Imagine yourself there.
Well, I got started this morning by milling some decorative trim strips that I'm going to apply over the fascia board. Now, you can't go to the home center and buy stock like this, but if you can find the right router bit, you can mill up your own. This is known as an edge beating bit. They come in a variety of sizes. This one happens to be a 5/8 inch diameter. The one that's set up in the router table is a 1/2 inch diameter. Now, the bit is made so that it removes just a little bit of material at the top of the bead, but it gives a nice rounded edge to the piece. Well, wait till you see what this looks like on our building. I've already wrapped the returns. Now I'm just putting the piece on the long fascia. You know, it's that shadow line that makes all the difference in the world. Now, for a finishing touch on the return, I'm going to put this board on. It's actually a little roof for the return. I've made a slot in the main roof plywood so I can slide it into position. Okay, now I've put a bead of caulking at the joint of the hip, and here's the little return piece. Now, the tricky part is making the cut along the hip, but not if you have a compound miter box. Now, the best way to determine the angles for these pieces is to actually make a couple trial cuts before you cut your final stock. For the blocks that I have and the pitch of the roof that I'm working with, I had to swing the table to 35 degrees and tip the saw to 31.5 degrees. All right. Now for the rake boards. First, I have to build up some blocking under the overhang. Now here we have a 2x4, the entire length, and cut to fit. Now the next piece to apply is this piece of pine, which is called the plancha, and it goes underneath the 2x. The tricky part is making this notch right down here. I'll show you how I did that. First, I've turned the saw table to 45 degrees. Now I'm going to tip the saw 45 degrees. I want to make a cut right from this corner at a 45-degree angle until I meet the line on the back side. Now just swing the table back to 0, tip the saw to 0, and make a short, straight cut. We'll finish it off with a handsaw. This piece of 1x6 will become the rake boards. The lower end of each rake board has to be cut at a 45-degree angle and a 45-degree bevel. Now, with the bottom cut made, I can tack it in place and mark the top. Now up here, it's just going to be a 45-degree miter, no bevel. Now after a couple trial fits, this seems to fit just fine. We can nail it all off. And finally, another piece of that beaded trim that we made in the shop to dress up the rake board. Now for our roof, I'm going to use red cedar wood shingles. And the first step is to put down a layer of 15-pound felt paper, sometimes called tar paper. The next step is to apply this nylon matrix. It's a mat that'll actually hold the shingles up from the surface a little bit, allowing air to come in from the bottom and the edges to ventilate the roof. This will dry out the underside of the shingles, preventing them from curling. Now, there is some expense to adding this mat, but it'll make the roof last much longer. Now, for the starter course of shingles, I've installed a string line from one end of the roof to the other, about 1 inch in front of the fascia board. I'll take each shingle and slide it down so it just comes to the line but doesn't push it away, and install it with a couple nails. Now I'm ready for the second course. Each shingle should overlap the joint by no less than 1 inch. I want to slide it down so that it's 1/8 of an inch below the starter course, and I want to leave about 1/8 of an inch gap for expansion and contraction. Well, we're making some good progress. Now you'll notice that I've attached a cleat to the roof. It's just a piece of pine that I've temporarily attached along the chalk line for each course, and I'll move it up with each successive course. It's very useful to support the shingles as I lay them out. Now the thing that I really have to keep in mind as I place each shingle is that I stagger the joints, and that the joints do not align within 3 courses. Now with the shingles run all the way up to the ridge, it's just a matter of trimming off the excess right along a line that I've snapped. Now with both sides of the roof shingled, it's time to deal with the ridge. To allow the air to come out from the matrix, we want to have a ridge vent, a capped ridge vent. So I'm going to use this material right here. It's a plastic material, looks a bit like corrugated cardboard. It allows the air to get out and it keeps the water from blowing in. We'll just nail that in place. Now the manufacturer of the vent strip supplies this end cap, and now all we want to do is cover the whole thing with a couple cedar boards. Now even though the roof pitch is framed at 45 degrees, the shingles are tapered so they flatten it out slightly. So I have to bevel the edges of the ridge boards about 5 degrees. Now this is hard enough to do here on the ground. It's murder to do if you're up on the roof. All right, that's going to look good. Just sticks over the cap a little bit, and I'll attach it with some screws. Well, the roof is weather tight. Now next time we'll build the rubbish storage, install the corner boards and windows, and clap it. That's next time right here on the new Yankee Workshop.